Hey everybody, thanks for joining back into a little bit more of Out of the Dust. We pick up on page 136. It's called No Good. I did play like a cripple at Arlie's show. Not that Arlie would ever say it, but my hands are no good anymore. My playing's no good. Arlie understands. I think he won't ask again. That was March of 1935. This is March of 1935. It's called Snow. Had to check yesterday morning to make sure that was snow on the ground, not dust. But you can't make a dust ball pack together and slam against the side of the barn and echo across the field, so I know it was snow. This one's called Night School. My father thought maybe he ought to go to night school, so if the farm failed, there'd be prospects to fall back on. He'd started to sound like Ma. The farm won't fail, I tell him, long as we get some good rain. I'm starting to sound like him. It's mostly ladies in those classes, he says. They take bookkeeping and civics and something called business English. I can't imagine him taking any of those things, but maybe he doesn't care so much about the classes. Maybe he's thinking more about the company of ladies. I'll bet none of the ladies mind spending time with my father. He's still good looking, with his strong back and his blondie red hair and his high cheeks rugged with wind. I shouldn't mind either. It's dinner I don't have to come up with because the ladies bring chicken and biscuits for him. I'm glad to get out of cooking. Sometimes with my hands it's hard to keep the fire, wash the pans, hold the knife, and spread a little butter, but I do mind his spending time with all of those biddies. I turn my back on him as he goes and settle myself in the parlor and touch Ma's piano. My fingers leave sighs in the dust. That was March of 1935. So's this one. This one's called Dust Pneumonia. 2 Fridays ago, Pete Gaimon drove in with a truck full of produce. He joked with Caleb Hardley, Mr. Hardley's son, while they unloaded eggs and cream down at the store. Pete Gaimon teased Caleb Hardley about the Wildcats losing to Hooker. Caleb Hardley teased Pete Gaimon about his wheezy truck sucking in dust. Last Friday, Pete Gaimon took ill with dust pneumonia. Nobody knew how to keep that produce truck on the road. It sat, filled with turkeys and heavy hens, waiting for delivery. It sat out in front of Pete's drafty shack and sits there still, the cream curdling, the apples going soft, because a couple of hours ago Pete Gaimon died. Mr. Hardley was already on the phone to a new produce supplier before evening. He had people in his store and no food to sell them. His boy, Caleb, slammed the basketball against the side of the house until Caleb's ma yelled for him to quit. And late that night, a truck rattled up to the store with colored springs, dozens of hens, filthy eggs, and a driver with no interest whatsoever in young Caleb Hardley or his precious wild cats. Okay, this is a dust storm, and it's still March 1935. I never would have gone to see the show if I had known a storm like this would come. I didn't know when going in, but coming out, a darker night I'd never seen. I bumped into a box beside the palace door and scraped my shins, then tripped on something in my path. I don't know what, and walked into a phone pole, bruised my cheek. The first car that I met was sideways in the road, bowed down, my eyes near shut, trying to keep the dust out. I saw his headlights just before I reached them. The driver called me over, and I felt my way, following his voice. He asked me how I kept the road. I feel it with my feet, I shouted over the roaring wind. I walk along the edge, 1 foot on the road, 1 on the shoulder. And desperate to get home, he straightened out his car and straddled tires on the road and off, and slowly pulled away. I kept along. I know that there were others on the road. From time to time, I'd hear someone cry out. Their voices rose like ghosts on the howling wind. No one could see. I stopped at neighbors just to catch my breath and made my way from town out to our farm. Everyone said to stay, but I guessed my father would come out to find me if I didn't show and get himself lost in the raging dust and maybe die, and I didn't want that burden on my soul. Brown earth rained down from the sky. I could not catch my breath the way the dust pressed on my chest and wouldn't stop. The dirt blew down so thick it scratched my eyes and stung my tender skin. It plugged my nose and filled inside my mouth. No matter how I pressed my lips together, the dust made muddy tracks across my tongue. But I kept on spitting out mud, covering my mouth, clamping my nose, the dust stinging and raw and open, stripes of scarring on my hands, and after some 3 hours, I made it home. Inside, I found my father's note that said he'd gone to find me, and if I get home, to just stay put. I hollered out the front door and the back. He didn't hear. I didn't think he would. The wind took my voice and busted it into 1,000 pieces, so small the sound blew out over Ma and Franklin's grave, thinner than a sigh. I waited for my father through the night, coughing up dust, cleaning dust out of my ears, rinsing my mouth, blowing mud from my nose. Joe de la Flor stopped by around 4 to tell me they found one boy tangled in a barbed wire fence, another smothered in a drift of dust. After Joe left, I thought about the famous Lindberghs and how their baby was killed and never came back to them. I wondered if my father would come back. He blew in around 6 a.m. It hurt, the sight of him, brown with dirt, his eyes as red as raw meat, his feet bruised from walking in worn shoes, stepping where he couldn't see, on things that bit and cut into his flesh. I tried to scare up something we could eat, but couldn't keep the table clear of dust. Everything I set down for our breakfast was covered before we took a bite. And so we chewed the grit and swallowed, and I thought of the cattle dead from the mud in their lungs, and I thought of the tractor buried up to the steering wheel, and Pete Gaimon, and I couldn't even recognize the man sitting across from me, sagging in his chair, his red hair gray and stiff with dust, his face deep lines of dust, his teeth streaked brown with dust. I turned the plates and glasses upside down, crawled into bed, and slept. This next one's 1935, March. Broken Promise. It rained a little everywhere, but here. Motherless. If Ma could put her arm across my shoulder sometime, or stroke back my hair, or sing me to sleep, making the soft sounds, the reassuring noises that no matter how brittle and sharp life seemed, no matter how brittle and sharp she seemed, she was still my Ma who loved me, then I think I wouldn't be so eager to go. This one's called Following in His Steps. Hayden Parley Nye's wife, Fonda, died today, 2 months after she lost her man. The cause of death was dust pneumonia, but I think she couldn't go on without Hayden. When Ma died, I didn't want to go on either. I don't know. I don't feel the same now, not exactly. Now that I see that one day comes after another and you get through them one measure at a time, I'd like to go, not like Fonda Nye. I don't want to die. I just want to go away, out of the dust. That was March of 1935. We will pick up next time on spring of 1935.